Is sales a job for you, or is it a calling? And if it is your calling, do you pour yourself into mastering your craft? Today's guest will inspire you to do just that. Welcome to The Buyer's Mind.
Welcome to The Buyer's Mind, where we take a closer look deep inside your customer's decision-making mechanism to reverse engineer the perfect sales presentation. Now, please welcome your host, Jeff Shore.
Well, welcome everyone to The Buyer's Mind, where we investigate exactly what is going on in the minds of prospects who are considering a purchase decision. That's what this podcast is all about. It's about taking a stroll through the buyer's brain. It's about knowing the customer so well that the sale begins to roll out right in front of you. I'm your host, Jeff Shore. You can read the full bio in the show notes, or you can visit jeffshore.com. While you're there, make sure you're signing up for our free weekly video newsletter, a little Saturday morning inspiration to help you on your journey. We're joined, as always, by our show producer, Paul Murphy. Hey, Murph, we're going to talk today a little about self-directed growth. It's such an interesting thing because too many people wait to get trained or to be taught. Now, you're kind of a tech guy. In the tech world, you have to purposely seek to stay ahead of the curve, yes?
I do. I have to get online and talk to my fellow editors and video people and just find out what they're doing and keep myself appraised of what's going on. If I don't, I fall behind.
So you fall behind, and then the next thing you know, you need an answer, and the answer is just not there off the tip of your tongue, right?
Not only is it not there at the tip of my tongue, but I am playing massive catch-up because it's a competitive world out here, and so lots of other people can do what I do if they are staying on top of it.
And that's for somebody who, in the tech world, you have to do that. It's just a job responsibility. But as we look at sales, this is one of the problems that we have is that we get to a level of proficiency and then we can tend to plateau. And not only are we not improving, we're not really thinking about how to improve. We're not really focusing in and challenging ourselves on how to get better, how to dedicate to that skill development. And our quote of the day is right along those lines from the philosopher Voltaire, who says, "No problem can withstand the assault of sustained thinking." No problem can withstand the assault of sustained thinking. Now listen, we often don't think to learn. We think to resolve. We want to solve a problem and we want to move on. But do we really look at it strategically to say, how do I learn? How do I grow? And today's guest, Andy Paul, is first and foremost a learner. Over the years, he has inspired me to want to learn more. Every time I talk to Andy, I walk away feeling like I need to self-direct this. I need to learn more. I cannot be reactive in my growth. I need to get out in front of it. This is really important because your buyer needs you to be smarter. They need you to be better prepared. As we get into today's podcast, we want to let you know that the show is brought to you in part by our good friends over at Home Street Bank. This is our show sponsor. It's also my lender of choice. I've used Home Street Bank, and it was the smoothest transaction that I've ever had. Professional, dependable, great rates and service. If you're a real estate professional, you're just not going to find better people to work with in taking care of your clients. So go to homestreetbank.com to learn more. That's homestreetbank.com. So before we get to our interview with Andy Paul, let me bring you our sales tip of the day. And it is the idea of following this mantra. Get smarter today than you were yesterday. Now, I'm borrowing from Abe Lincoln, who once said, "I don't think much of a man who is not smarter today than he was yesterday." But don't get smarter with the thought of gaining knowledge. Get smarter with the thought of application. And this is one of the things that I'm always looking at for me personally. I'm always, when I'm reading something, when I'm listening to a podcast or I'm reading a book, I'm always asking questions. I'm always challenging the concept, asking questions of the concept, because I don't just want to expand my brain. I want to know, how do I apply this? How will this make me not just more intellectually intelligent, but more tactically intelligent for what it is that I have to do? And I think as you listen to this interview with Andy, you're going to keep that in mind. I want you to do that with that objective. How will you not just learn something, but how will you apply something? Well, I got to tell you, I'm so excited about a new program from Shore Consulting. We launched it just this year. It's our Sales Leadership Academy. If you are new to the area of sales leadership, you're fresh into your new role, but you're still trying to figure it out, this program is for you. Or perhaps you're a veteran sales leader, but you've got salespeople that you want to groom into a sales leadership position. That will work here as well. So the program is designed either for new sales leaders or for up-and-comers, for future sales leaders. It's an incredible program, 2 days live with me, followed by 8 weeks of follow-up sessions where you're going to get everything you're going to need to know for sales leadership. So whether you're new to sales leadership or whether you're a future sales leader, you're going to find it all at the Sales Leadership Academy. Just visit jeffshore.com/SLA to learn more. All right, well, let's take the time now to talk to my friend Andy Paul. He's the author of Amp Up Your Sales and Zero Time Selling. You can find both of those books on Amazon.com, or you can go to his website. Andy is a keynoter. He's an outstanding one-on-one sales coach, and he's the host of the Accelerate podcast. So if you're not listening to that, just hop over to iTunes, type in Accelerate with Andy Paul, and it's just a slew of great guests, and he's just a really interesting interviewer. You'll hear that here momentarily. I envy Andy, not just because he's a really good guy and because he's brilliant on the whole sales thing, but he lives half his life in one of my favorite cities, New York, and then half of his life in one of my other favorite cities, San Diego. All that by saying, when I grow up, I want to be Andy Paul. Andy, welcome to The Buyer's Mind. Glad to have you.
Oh, thanks for inviting me. That's a very generous introduction. Thank you.
How does one order their life so that they can live part-time in San Diego and part-time in New York? So I have a feeling there are a whole lot of people listening right now and saying, hey, wait a minute, I want that gig.
Yeah. Well, you have to, you have to get divorced and meet someone new who lives on the other side of the country. Mm-hmm. And it sort of ends up that way.
There you go.
But yeah, no, I've been very fortunate to be able to pull that off, and yeah, a lot of hard work behind that.
Right.
The sort of relationship mishap notwithstanding.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. But life hands us these things, and then what do? We try and figure out how to make the best of it. And boy, it sounds like you've made the best of it. And you've got a thriving career in your sales coaching, in your keynoting, in your writing, in your podcasting. And one of the reasons I wanted you on the show is because you and I share a common interest in understanding the way that people think. And I know that we deal in this world of sales where a lot of times you'll see people, whether they're sales practitioners or so-called sales experts, are going to say, I think this will work, but they haven't really investigated from the perspective of, well, what is the psychology behind that? So before we get into some specifics, tell me about your intellectual background and what got you started on your desire to have that deeper understanding of buyer psychology.
Well, really two things. I mean, the first one was my first job out of school was selling mini computers and small mainframes for Burroughs. That's dating myself because most people probably don't remember Burroughs, but used to be the second largest computer company in the world when I worked for them. And now Unisys. And when I first started selling, I was selling things from $50,000 to $100,000. Systems worth that. I couldn't understand why people were buying from me. And the primary reason was that I looked 12 years old. And I thought, okay, how am I walking into these businesses, talking to the CEOs? And I'm not kidding you about looking like a teenager. It's like, how was I able to convince them to buy from me? And because I looked in the mirror and I thought, I wouldn't have bought from you just based on the way you looked. I mean, it's just too young. How to develop that credibility and the trust? And so that sort of started me on the journey of sort of trying to understand why people made the decisions and how they made the decisions they did. And then I think the second thing that was really an influential point in time in my career is when I was working for a couple startups where we were selling very large ticket communications equipment systems to some of the biggest companies in the world, all around the world. And we were a startup with no track record, no brand name, competing against the big guys, the brand names everybody recognizes, Lockheed, Hughes, Northrop, so on. And yet we won a lot of business. The second company that I mentioned, they're a couple $1 billion a year now, and they've continued to grow very well. And so I was always fascinated about how we made that happen. And we were the distinct underdogs selling mission critical systems, into these large companies, how did people, reach the decision to buy from us as opposed to the safe choice, or what would they perceive to be the safe choice?
So it's interesting because a lot of people will look at it and say, well, I'm successful. I must be doing something right. And so I'll just keep doing what I'm doing. But it sounds like you just took it to the next level to try and open up a diagnostic on this and say, well, clearly we're doing something right. But what is that? Because this goes to the whole idea that, I once had a golf coach who said, just because the ball went straight doesn't mean you hit it right. If you don't know why you hit it right, then you can't replicate the behavior. It sounds like, I don't want to put words in your mouth, Andy, but it sounds like that's where your track was taking you to try and figure out, we're successful, but why are we successful?
Well, and I think the motivation behind that was to say, well, how do I win a larger percentage of my deals, right? If I understand this, if I think I develop a better understanding of this, then I'm going to increase my odds of being really competitive in every opportunity that we have. And I sort of laugh, I in certain sectors of our economy, let's say software as a service is one particular segment I'm pretty familiar with guests I've had on my show and so on, is that the average win rate of in their pipeline of qualified opportunities is like 20%. And for me, I could never have lived on that. I mean, I was closing closer to 3/4 of the deals that I consider to be qualified opportunities. But I was only able to do that because I really thought deeply and studied, why might they do this, right? Why might somebody buy from me versus someone else? And really structured a process around, okay, how do I sell this in such a way that the obvious choice then becomes me? And I think we have a lot of successful people that just achieve a certain level of success and just keep on sort of doing what they're doing without really thinking about it. In fact, I think that's a vast majority of people in sales. And eventually you're going to run into a situation that you don't know how to handle, and you're really going to be rocked by it because you just haven't given it any thought. And for some people, it's career ending when that happens. They just don't have the resilience to get through it.
Sure. Let me go back for a moment to what you said. You were 12, and you looked yourself in the mirror and you said, I wouldn't buy from me. Can we talk about that for just a moment? Because the idea that for a lot of salespeople, there are just paradigm issues that get in the way of the way that they see themselves and whether they, it's right from the very beginning. If I look and say, well, there's that guy, he's the top performer, I'm not that guy. And as soon as you start telling yourself you're not that guy, then you're probably right. Your actions and behaviors are always going to be consistent with the way that you see yourself. But for those people who are out there and they say, I'm too young, I'm too old, I'm too Latino, I'm too female, I'm too whatever they think puts them at a disadvantage, that you and I both know it's like, that's just a story you're telling yourself. You and I both know that that's not a disadvantage, but they might see it that way. What advice do you have for people who've got some hang up that would cause them to say, I've got this strike against me?
It's really to be yourself. I see where the problems are most people have in business. And sometimes I fall into this. I've over the last 6 years since I really started the sort of reinventing myself as an author and a public speaker. Before that, I had a consulting business, but when I moved to New York in 2010, I shifted what I was doing, and I had a lot to learn. And there's always this temptation when you're learning something new is to, I'm going to go see what this expert's doing. I'm going to do just what they say to do, right? And it's like you're outsourcing your thought process to this person instead of saying, okay, well, that's interesting what they're doing. Now, how do I make that mine, right? How do they make that true to what I am and my voice and the things that I believe? And to me, the people I found have been really successful are those people, right? Is that the more you have it within you. You said, people challenge that paradigm. Oh, I'm not that person. Yeah, you just have to be yourself, right? And learn the things that are going to help you, be able to build trust with another individual, make a connection, engage with them, but doing it in your way. And I think some people get really uncomfortable with this idea that their way will be okay, as opposed to saying, well, hey, here's something I learned in a class, and this guy said I could 10x my sales if I just followed this sales process. Well, that's his sales process. That's not yours.
Okay, so let's take that a little deeper then and talk about scripts for just a moment. Are you a sales script guy? And yes or no, and then defend your position either way.
Well, I think people have patterns of behavior. We have habits we follow. Are the habits scripts? Well, yes and no. I mean, to some degree, there are some avenues in sales where the sales interaction is very tightly scripted by managers or by marketing, and you get somebody on the phone and they're going to ask these questions in this sequence. Mm-hmm. And what I see happen time and time again, I listen to these phone calls and so on, is that they're so intent on asking the next question on the script that they don't really listen to the answer they're given to the first question. Mm-hmm. And so the problem becomes that you start missing all these opportunities because the customer is leaving the door open for you to, instead of just plow ahead to your second question, sort of pause for seconds. Well, that's interesting. What else could you tell me about that? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And start going deeper and deeper. So, I think that there's a certain flow to deals, but I mean, to me, I always liken it to jazz, and that it's an improvisation. And I know all the notes, right? I mean, there's a finite number of notes. I know the notes, but I'm going to respond based on what I'm hearing from the prospect and from the buyer. And so no two are ever going to be the same.
Sure. Yeah.
Identical.
I love the picture of likening it to jazz, because as somebody who has studied music, I know that, I can have, if I'm playing the piano and I'm going to play something classical, I've got sheet music in front of me, and it tells me every note I'm going to play, exactly how long I'm going to hold the note, where they fit with all the other notes, when I'm not going to be playing. It's all designated for me. And so theoretically, everybody who plays that piece is going to be playing exactly the same thing. And that's a script. And I'm not suggesting that it can't be beautiful in its own way, but that's not sales. Because when you look at jazz, generally, if you look at jazz, what you get is you get a melody line and you get a chord, and that's about it. Mm-hmm. And then you're making you're making everything else up, but within a structure that says, the song's going this way. And by the way, this is what the drummer's looking at. This is what your bass player is looking at. So if you're the pianist, you got to stay within the structure. And so the error to me on either side is either that you're too overly scripted and you just sound like you're a robot and you're completely unoriginal, or you're doing your own thing and now you can't even be followed because you're off the music altogether.
Right. Well, I think one of the impetuses to this whole idea of sales reps becoming more scripted and overly scripted, which is a trend I see happening, mm-hmm. is this idea that on the other side is that the customer's buying process is a fixed process, just like their sales scripted process, right? Mm-hmm. Or that it's a knowable process. And this is really a fallacy that I talk about all the time that we have to sort of get rid of. Is that, let's say you're selling something. Take both the business and consumer example. And I know you work a lot in real estate, right? Mm-hmm. Well, how many times during their lives do people buy real estate, right? I mean, it's not a lot, right? It's not something you're doing every week, every year. Mm-hmm. And so I guarantee you don't have a fixed process for doing that, mm-hmm. because it's not something you're doing enough to invest the time to have a described or circumscribed process for. And the same thing is true in business, right? If you're selling something into a large enterprise, and let's say it's something that has some degree of complexity and it's relatively expensive, there are very prominent authors out there, many of whom you and I both know, that would say, well, you got to go in and find out what the customer's buying process is. And the fact is, they have no freaking idea what that is. They're making it up because they've never done it before.
Right. Yeah. And it's funny because in the world of consumer sales, you only see it in the most rudimentary things. It's things like saying, I'm just looking. That, as far as I know, that's my process. And that's about as much as I've thought it through. But I completely agree with the idea on the scripting side, because look, I've been there myself. And I remember back in the day, you'd go to a training session, I'd memorize something that'd come out, and then I would find myself in the middle of a conversation while my customer is talking. And I'm thinking to myself, when you shut up, I've got something brilliant to say. And I learned it in training, and this is going to blow you away. And the idea at that point that I'm going to understand my customer is it's flawed thinking for sure.
Yeah. So you just have to be open to the possibilities. I mean, that's, again, you're each playing a song and you don't have the same song. You have different songs, and you're gonna make music together. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What have you learned about buyer behavior, maybe even in the recent past, that just really you thought was really, really interesting, that caused you to just pause the tape or look off and to the right and really just chew on that deeply for a while?
Well, I think the most recent one, and this is something that's really, hopefully if people are reading about this, it's forcing them to pause and think, is, there's been a tremendous number of advances in sort of the research in social psychology over the last, early since World War II. Daniel Kahneman and Richard Thaler just won a Nobel Prize and da 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 da.
Right.
Well, there's this crisis going on in the social psychology field, which is saying that it's really calling a lot of this research into question. Things that Kahneman in his book Thinking Fast, Slow, talking about priming, saying, hey, this is established science. There is no argument about this. This happens. And he's actually come out recently and said, well, yeah, that was based on a really small sample size. And there's just sort of this, armed war going on in the social psychology field with people that are trying to replicate these seminal studies. And what they're finding is they can't. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of what we've learned about influence and connecting with other people and so on that deal with sales, is the, instead of being absolutely true, is more likely to be just sort of true. And so I think that to me is a really big one. Mm-hmm. And because I've been doing a lot of reading in that field over the last 5 years, and it's like, oh, well, okay, some of these things I had accepted as fact maybe really aren't at this point. And then another thing I think that's really important is there's been more work done in this whole field of sort of cognitive biases and understanding just how natural or intrinsic to us these biases are that we all hold. And there's a great book called Blind Spot: The Hidden Biases of Good People, mm-hmm. that I really recommend people read, because these researchers have studied they have well over 1 million examples of surveys they've given to people that they design in such a way to sort of test our fundamental biases. And it's kind of startling when you take one yourself, because even if you think yourself to be very egalitarian and so on, you find that we all hold biases. Mm-hmm. And so what this does is this affects the way we receive information from other people, and it affects the way we communicate information to other people. And my wife teaches medical school at NYU, and they teach a course there about for doctors to become doctors' bedside manner. They call it practice of medicine. Mm-hmm. But there's a lecture they give. I remember my wife's daughter went through that a couple of years ago. Was, they say, hey, when you come into the examining room as a physician, you've got, I forget the exact number, I think it was 21 or 22 biases that you have to filter through in order to accurately hear what the patient is telling you. It starts with gender, age, ethnicity, the way they dress, where they live. You can just go down the list. They all have an impact on how you receive this information. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so as sellers, we have that same thing working for us. When we talk to buyers, we're filtering it based on these biases we hold. So this book was really interesting to me because it really forced me to say, okay, we all in sales, we have to become much more aware of what these biases that we hold could be, and how do we filter our way through them? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, so let's unpack this a little bit. Let me go back to your first statement first about this really interesting turning point, or you called it a crisis in social psychology, in the sense that what we know about social psychology we have learned really fairly recently, especially over the last 10 or 20 years, of what we learned through the neurosciences and how we can actually see is happening in the brain either validates or negates what social psychologists might have told us. And so I agree with you that this is an unfolding field as we go through here. Second thing is that you mentioned Daniel Kahneman, and just so you know, this every time Daniel Kahneman's name pops up on the buyer's mind, an angel gets its wings, or something like that. But it happens quite frequently here, and he is our hero. So if you just made a disparaging remark about Daniel Kahneman, I'm sorry, Andy, but we have to cut this off right now, because we'll not allow that to happen.
Well, but the thing is, Kahneman has come out within the last, I think it was year, and basically acknowledged that what he said was the exact, absolute truth about priming is one of his perfect examples. Yeah. Actually, it may not be true, because I think the study they did that claimed to validate it had like 30 subjects in it.
Right. Yeah. No. He. I don't know if you've read Michael Lewis's book, The Undoing Project. He talks about the same thing where he and when he was working with Amos Tversky, and I'm trying to remember what it was, but they did this deep dive and they were totally excited about it. And I wish I could remember what the concept was, but he was, and Amos Tversky both were big enough to look at it and go, this is what we really want to believe, but the data is not pointing in the right direction. And it just took him in it didn't mean it was totally worthless, but it took him in a deeper dive of wanting to understand it more fully. And I love that about him, is that he's honest enough to be able to challenge even his own research and his own thoughts, because it's not lost on him that he understands that even somebody like Daniel Kahneman, an expert in cognitive biases, has cognitive biases, right? So
exactly. Well, I think that, right. And so now we're, especially in sales, there's this increasing emphasis on the science of selling, and I think there certainly are elements of science in there for sure. But we have to approach that with less certainty than we might have even a year or two ago.
We're getting short on time. Tell me, who do you follow? Who do you study? How do you stay sharp and fresh? Because there's one thing I've learned about you over time, is that you are never content just to sit on your hands and say, well, I've come to a point where I've learned enough, thank you, and now I can just regurgitate all that I have learned, and I'll make that my career. You are a continual student. So tell us a little bit about the discipline of growth.
It's not always been about sales and marketing, right? I mean, I've, as you know, I'm a history major by training, I guess, in college. And so, my intellectual heroes, if you will, are pretty widespread. In fact, I'm not sure there's any from the realm of business per se. I mean, from a political standpoint, Lincoln, the founding fathers, I love reading Ralph Waldo Emerson, biographies about the founding fathers, or FDR, people that were presidents at time of big conflict during the country. I find fascinating. That's why I read a ton on Lincoln. Harold Bloom, who writes a lot about the great classics and the authors and why we should be reading those, and has written fascinating stuff about Shakespeare, and I love Shakespeare and poetry. So I have a lot of influences in there. And that to me is I do a lot of reading, and obviously for the podcast, we've done 600 episodes, and I probably have read 150 books, in preparation for interviews with those, and really get my fill of business books from that, and a lot of interesting things being written about leadership and human connection and so on, that I find just very interesting. It's I always find something in any book, even if I don't really like the book necessarily, or don't necessarily agree with the author, they still have something in there that will force me to think. Sure.
And you mentioned Richard Thaler earlier. I mean, the book Nudge has nothing to do with sales, and it has everything to do with sales. It's really just it depends what your perspective is as you read it through, right?
I think I encourage people just to read more broadly, to get outside of business and be challenged intellectually and philosophically, because at the end of the day, I think success in sales is based upon having a philosophy and some guiding principles that are based on the philosophy, more than methodology and tactical and strategic nuance.
Right.
It's about your principles, and if you can hold true to your principles, you'll succeed.
Let me ask you one last question here. Give us a piece of advice for somebody who is actually, I'm going to ask for two pieces of advice. One for somebody who is brand new to sales, and then another for somebody who's been doing it for a while but maybe has hit a plateau.
Well, for the new person is just to go out and do it. Right, is to not get so hung up in, am I doing it the right way? Am I, have I learned everything I need to know about the product before I go out and do it? I mean, that'd be great, ideally, if you could, but just go out and talk to customers, as many customers and prospects as you can. I mean, I think that there's no substitute for experience, especially engaging in true sales conversations with customers and prospects. I just, I was fortunate to be able to start where they threw me out into the deep end, making cold calls, selling mini computers, and I still rely on that experience today. For people sort of hit a plateau, boy, that can be a longer conversation. But I think that what you want to do is you want to sort of look at what you're doing and take one thing you can really focus on to integrate into your sales process or to accentuate in the way you sell. And for me, what I always recommend for people to start is their responsiveness, right? To me, responsiveness is just not about being fast. It's about being able to provide the prospect with something of value that helps them move closer to making a decision delivered quickly, right? Because customers don't want to spend an unlimited period of time making decisions. We can go through the whole psychology of maximizers, satisficers, but in general, people want to make the good enough decision. I mean, they want to gather enough information to make a good enough decision that's going to meet their needs. So you have this opportunity every time you have the opportunity to reach out to a prospect to help them move closer and to do that in a very responsive fashion. I've seen time and time again over the last 30 plus years where responsiveness just by itself can be such a critical differentiator that you can win a tremendous amount of business. And for somebody to sort of hit that plateau, it's a great thing to focus on, because suddenly you get in the habit of doing it. You set the bar for being incredibly responsive. The customers begin to expect it, not just of you, but of your competitors. They can't live up to it. You win the deal.
I love it. His name is Andy Paul. You can follow him on andypaul.com. There you can find out about his 2 books, Amp Up Your Sales and Zero Time Selling. You can also subscribe to the Accelerate podcast. It's just a fantastic discussion each and every week. And also follow Andy on social media all over the place. That's andypaul.com, and we'll put that in the show notes as well. Andy, I can't thank you enough. I had high expectations for this conversation. You did not disappoint.
Oh, Jeff, thanks very much. Always a pleasure to talk to you, and an honor to be on your show.
Well, Murph, you see why I wanted to get Andy on the show. He's just he's a smart guy, but he's just a good guy, isn't he?
Yeah, very practical stuff. I always like when we have practical guests on the show. I just think it's useful for our audience.
Yeah, and he sort of carries the banner that, that is the antithesis of what some people think about sales, meaning, you have to be brash and out there and in your face. And that's not Andy at all. He's the type of guy who, he's going to speak, you're going to listen, and you feel like you're going to be better off by the time that you're done. I'll tell you, there were some really, really interesting things that I walked away with from that conversation. One is just that the sense of you just have to be your authentic self and not apologize for that. And this is a flaw that we see all the time, because when we see somebody who is essentially trying to be something they're not, we know it, don't we?
I think when people aren't being authentic, the hairs on the back of your neck stand up a little bit, right? Because you're like, okay, I have to play games, and nobody likes to play games.
Now, did I just geek out on the whole conversation about jazz, or was that interesting, do you think, to anybody besides Andy and I?
I like to talk about it musically. I like the idea of talking about things musically, just because I have music in my background as well. And so, passion in scripted music is one thing, but to be able to not be scripted specifically makes music just far more interesting. And so I don't think you were geeking out too much. I think everybody can relate to that.
The music analogy works. And look, I'm looking at him saying, if I need brain surgery, there is a script to that. There's a method to that. And I would rather my doctor not improvise any more than he or she had to. But when it comes to sales, there's no question about it. There's a structure that we follow, but the jazz analogy works really, really well. It's really cool when we do this, but we're still in the structure. It really adds some value, and it's very pleasing when I go over here and improvise this, but it's still within the structure. And I think the mistake that gets made over and again by salespeople is that they stay either too structured on the one hand or completely unstructured on the other. And both of those, they're not going to allow the mental flexibility that we have to have when we're dealing with our customers, and that core that we always talk about on the buyer's mind, and that is that your job is to make it easy for the person to do what they want to do anyway. So the last thing that I would talk about here is when Andy was talking about the idea of how fascinated he was by how he was successful. And so often when we find success in sales, we're like, hey, look at me, that's great. We love the fact that we are successful, but we don't take enough time to try and figure out why we are successful. And for Andy, he looked at it and he said, I wanted to win a larger percentage of deals. And I just want to challenge you, the listener, to ask yourself the question, if you are successful, why are you successful? What works? And not just what works, but Why does it work? And if you take the time to really unpack that, you're going to find that you can expand upon that you can take the principles that you learned there and apply them into other areas. Stop just thinking, aren't I great? I'm successful. But what really counts is, why are we making sales? How are we helping people as effectively as we are? And you get that right, and you can take your sales game to an entirely new level. Well, I have to tell you, one of the greatest overlooked skill sets in sales is the skill set called curiosity. It's true in your sales presentation. It's true in life. And I just love this quote from Arnold Edinburgh. I think this is a fantastic quote. He says, "If you tell me that curiosity killed the cat, I say only that the cat died nobly." I love that. If you tell me that curiosity killed the cat, I say that the cat died nobly. And let me just ask you the question, how curious are you? How curious about your customer? How curious are you about their journey, about their mission? How curious are you about your job, about your marketplace, about your industry? How curious are you? And if you adopt that mindset today in your job, at home, with the food server who serves you dinner later on tonight, or just spend 15 curious minutes on Wikipedia, for Pete's sake. How curious are you? I want to tell you, the world is just so full of new and fascinating information. And all you have to do is step out and ask the world questions. All you have to do is step out a little bit. The internet is an amazing thing. Let your curiosity flow. But you know what's more amazing than the internet? Your teenager. How curious are you with your teenager? How curious are you with your customers? Flex that curiosity muscle. It's a great way not just to do your job, it's a great way to live your life. Well, if you're enjoying The Buyer's Mind, we really appreciate it if you subscribe to the podcast. It would mean so much to us. And if you love it, leave a review. Thank you so much. That's a wrap on The Buyer's Mind for today. Hope you enjoyed it. You can find everything you need at jeffshore.com. But until next time, my friends, go out there and change someone's world.